Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Holy Happy Hour. I'm your host, Josh, and I wanted to first of all remind you guys to like and subscribe. That helps support the channel. And how the algorithm works is when you engage with the channel, it spreads the channel out to people that might like it as well, or people you follow. So it's kind of a social media way of evangelizing. Today we are going to be kind of starting our little series. I've got three people that have heard their conversion stories. I am also a Catholic convert, and I thought it'd be super cool during this Advent season to kind of talk with some people that have converted to the Catholic faith. So today, I'm with Caleb Harlan, who is, I always want to say parishioner of Christ the King, but parishioner of Holy Family. But he plugs in with some small group stuff with us at Christ the King here in Tulsa. But Caleb, how's it going?
Hey, good. It's
Good.
good to be on here. Finally do this.
Yeah. Yeah, we had some technical difficulties last time. And if anyone knows, I always make jokes about, I don't know if you know Daniel McKay yet. Met him, Daniel.
I haven't.
He
No.
does all the videos and stuff for the diocese, for the chancery, for Bishop Condola. And I'm always like, one day I'm gonna get you to help me out over here because when technical difficulties happen, I can try a couple things and then after that it's like I am useless. Like we'll just
Same here.
refresh. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
we're able to refresh and now we're good to go. So
That's right.
yeah, how's the Advent season been so far?
Oh, it's been good. We went to our friend's house the other day for St. Nicholas feast day, and then we came
Okay.
home and we had a big gift of Christmas goodies that someone dropped off. So I still don't know who it is. They left it
Oh,
anonymously,
nice.
but
That's
that was
awesome.
it's been a good first couple weeks of Advent, and
Yeah,
yeah. Anyway,
that is super cool. I love when people do that. We had something similar happen in we were living in Oklahoma City and we were living off a single income and that single income was $10 an hour plus commission. So I had to work. So
yeah,
things got super tight. It was the most stressful time of my life. And we had at this time around Christmas time, we weren't Catholic. No, wait, we would have been Catholic. We just weren't like super into our faith yet. Or I wasn't. My wife
yeah,
was. But yeah, we were just working and my wife was just I was just stressing out. And my wife was like, you just got to keep working, just keep praying about it. And yeah, we went into work one day, and the person we worked with these little nutrition clubs. He was like, "Hey, someone left you a Christmas card." I'm like, "Oh, who's it from?" And he's like, "I don't know. I've never seen this person before." Which was really cool
yeah,
because this guy is at that nutrition club with me all the time. It was we knew who these people were, and you'd have regulars come in, you'd have new people come in, and be like, okay, I've never seen that person, but a new person like that's not going to leave you a Christmas card. But yeah, this
yeah.
person just left a card and said, thank you for all you do for the community. I hope this helps you and your family. And it wasn't signed by anybody, and it just had $300 in it. And we're just like,
Yeah.
what the heck?
Yes.
And so we to this day, we're like, I bet that was like St. Joseph or something, like leaving as a gift or something,
Yeah.
or St. Nicholas. But yeah,
I've
that's
joked before, man, Christians have a bad PR rep because we if you're doing generosity right, you're doing it somewhat anonymously. Like and
yeah,
and and so just from a public relations standpoint, it's like, man, we do a lot of good and we don't really want the credit, and that's kind of the whole point.
yeah. That is the hardest thing. I feel like that was my biggest I guess vice. Yeah, like was pride and just wanting recognition for things and wanting
Yeah.
to be the front man, be that. Actually, that's why when I started this podcast, I've actually mentioned it before in the show. Is I talked with Father Elkin before I started, and I was like, I really feel like called to do this to kind of be more Catholic content creation on YouTube, social media,
Yeah.
and but I said, but I don't want. I've always struggled with this, and you know that. Like, I don't want to be chasing that instead. And he's like, yeah, I mean, you have to constantly be perfecting your intentions. And I was like, yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I always struggled with that. Like doing something, and if they don't thank you or something, you're like, what the heck? It's like,
Yeah.
man, no, I need to be able to be behind the scenes. That's always been a struggle for me.
Yeah, gosh, I don't know how long we want to camp out here. I mean, I think, but I think there's something to formerly being a more of a public guy where I was getting up
Mm-hmm.
in front of people every week,
Mm-hmm.
and preaching and speaking and leading, and it was always actually I just was walking around campus with Gerald a few weeks ago, and he's like, "How is it like? How is it like?" Getting feedback and getting recognition, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird thing because there's you don't want to be totally distant from your work and just be like, it's all worthless, like it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter, I don't need your thank you. And at the same time, like, you can't like eat it up, you're not doing
Mm-hmm.
it for their applause, you're not doing
Yeah.
it for their appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was always just a kind of a fine line, and I
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I think that there's something there that actually, even I know we haven't jumped into Catholic story yet, but
Mm-hmm.
just the humility of some of the people that I really surrounded myself with and got to know,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly Gerald, and we've talked about Gerald, and
Mm-hmm.
just like the brilliance of
Yeah.
this man, and
Yeah.
at the same time the humility of this guy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just so attractive. But
Yeah. That's
anyway,
what I want to start pushing him out more. I think
yeah,
that if parishes are paying to have local people come and speak at like Advent by candlelight or at their supper series and stuff like that, I'm like, you guys are missing out.
seriously,
And I tell people all the time, ever since I've started working here, I'm like, Gerald is like the hidden gem of the entire diocese, like the
I
entire
agree.
diocese of Tulsa, because it's like we have Carlo Broussard, which is amazing, and he can go do great speaking, but
Yeah,
people don't realize like Gerald could also do that same caliber like talks, like to
yeah,
go do that same caliber education, which is awesome. Yeah, and yeah, and he really
yeah,
is. He knows like his mission is to be here and help college students and stuff. So he's not seeking out like going around and speaking. And even though he probably could go make a little bit extra money and go chase this like yeah kind of fame within the diocese kind of yeah, super humble
yeah,
guy. And yeah, I most recently struggled with it with that fundraiser dinner that you spoke at, but I these people just stopping me afterwards like, you did so good, like congratulations on this, and like
yeah,
not wanting to just like eat it all up and just take it all in. And I was just like, I mean, I worked really hard on it, but at the same time, like this would have been possible without like the donors, but also like I was just doing what God's called me to do here in fundraising and
yeah,
put on a great show to highlight the students and the people that have been affected by ministry. If we didn't have those testimonies and it would have just been the dinner side, which is really the side I planned, and then it didn't have the testimonies, then that dinner is really not
yeah.
not that great. So
At the end of the day, it's
um,
like, I'm glad that God used this to minister to you, and
yeah, yeah,
I would kind of wrap things up with my sermon. If someone was appreciative, I'm like, man, I'm so glad that God worked through that.
yeah, hmm,
And I want to be diligent and faithful in working. Like you did a great job. You did do a great job preparing for that, and you worked hard, and you got all the things figured out. And God
hmm,
used those means, and He
hmm,
brought forth a lot of fruit from it. So praise God.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
anyway,
I always got to keep my intentions like that.
yeah, right,
Well, cool. Well, we're gonna be jumping into the kind of conversions and stuff, and I love these because I've seen a bunch of other YouTube channels people I like look up to. Like I look up to their channels. I think they're doing really great work, and that's some of my favorite things when they bring on people that have converted or people that are considering converting, and just hearing those conversations. Because I feel like there's more people out there than we think that are maybe they're not completely happy where they're at and they don't know what the truth is and they're seeking it or something. So I was like, yeah, this would be awesome to do this. Like kind of, I found three great people like doing kind of this 3-part series on this of just different people's stories that came from different backgrounds.
yeah,
And so I thought maybe we'd just kind of give everyone the context first, and we'll kind of both talk. Cause I'm also a convert, but we'll both talk about our stories, but mainly focusing on yours. So I thought maybe we just start with you kind of giving us a
yeah,
rundown of yours and
sure.
share as little as or as
I'll
much as
choose
you want.
a 5 to 7 minute
That's
flyover, and then we'll
yeah,
come in and tackle some of
that's
the things a
that's
bit.
perfect.
More.
Yeah,
Um, so I was raised. I will back further up than I talked about at the talk the other night.
yeah,
Was raised in like an evangelical home. My dad was a pastor for a church, so kind of grew up around the church, but was a very rebellious kid, and that really happened through high school and college. I went to the University of Tulsa. I'm repping. I don't know if you noticed
nice.
that.
Oh yeah,
Um, and was a crazy party kid. And my senior year, I was befriended by a Christian guy who's still my best friend to this day, and he was going to a Presbyterian church, which just plays a huge role in my life. And it was the first time that I like actually went and wanted to go back, and felt good. And I was part of that church for 3 or 4 years after college. I met my wife. We got married. We started attending that church, and I would say that was like my conversion to Christ,
mm-hmm.
through that church, and particularly the preaching of this one guy. They went off and launched a church plant that I had become a part of this community group. There were about 12 of us, and we became our own church, which was in this denomination.
Mm-hmm.
And we that was like the most fruitful time. We hadn't had kids yet. My wife and I
Mm-hmm.
were newly married, and we were just on fire.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to everyone that entered into that place, we wanted to have over to our house. We wanted to get to know. We wanted to disciple and invest in. We wanted to serve however we could.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an exciting time. And that church really grew and grew. A few years later, so this is now 4 years after I graduated, I joined staff of that church plant,
Mm-hmm.
and became a full-time seminary student. It was a new program. It was a distance MDiv, so Master's of Divinity from Reformed Theological Seminary. And so once a semester, I'd fly down to Orlando and take some classes there, but the rest I did online. I worked at this church. It was a booming time. That's a whole nother story. The church kind of folded, which I think God, yeah, there's probably things there that drew my heart towards the stability of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But things kind of folded there. It's and I left, and in God's timing, as I was needing to get out of there, the former Reformed University Fellowship campus minister at TU was leaving, and so I jumped in,
Mm-hmm.
pretty unprepared. So at this point, I was still finishing up seminary. We just had our second baby, and I was jumping into this job, and the church that we were leaving was a wreck, and that was
Mm-hmm.
a really hard, dark time. That first
Mm-hmm.
semester at TU in particular, but things really picked up, and I finished seminary. I got ordained in the Presbyterian Church in America, the PCA,
Mm-hmm.
and I worked at the University of Tulsa for 6 years. uh, In comes the fall of 2020, where all bets are off, and people can we're finding creative ways to engage students and evangelize. And there were a couple of focus missionaries from TU's Newman
Mm-hmm.
Center that started coming into the Presbyterian Chapel on campus and handing out
Mm-hmm.
this book called Pope Peter. And and maybe to backtrack a little, in my seminary training, like we had two church history classes. One was pre-Reformation, which was really the creeds, the early councils, the early seven ecumenical councils,
Mm-hmm.
Augustine, those weird medieval ages where nothing good happened,
Mm-hmm.
and then Aquinas a little bit, and then thank God for Luther and the Reformation. Like that was church history number
Mm-hmm.
one, and then church history number two was the Reformation and the spread and the growth of American Protestantism.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have any answers. So my students were getting this book, Pope Peter, which addressed a lot of kind of Catholic theology, in particular around the Pope. And they're like, "Hey, what do you think of the Pope?" And I said, "Well, I know that the Westminster Confession calls him the Antichrist, but I don't think he's that. I don't really know, though. I've never really thought
Mm-hmm.
much about the Pope. I've never had to."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and so I went into the Newman Center. I'm like, "Who's giving this book out to my students?" And that's when Gerald was like, he must have heard my voice, and he came out and he's like, "That was me." And I was like, "Hey, I'll read this book if you talk to me about it." And I full on intention was reading this book and converting Gerald to the true Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
And God kind of did the opposite. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I started meeting with him for coffee. He was the most, as we were talking about, just super gentle, and he was really intelligent. He was the smartest guy I've ever met in my life.
Mm-hmm.
He was giving really good answers, really knew his theology. But I would say more than anything, like God has given him a real zeal for Jesus, and a way of life that's evolved around Jesus and the church that was really attractive to me. So
Mm-hmm.
there's always, I would always say that there's for real conversion to happen, you've got to have good answers, and you've got to have good people. You've got to have the truth, and you've got to have community. And
Yeah.
Gerald really became that first Catholic person I ever really knew. I mean, I had like a
Mm-hmm.
Catholic friend in high school that maybe went to mass once a year.
Yeah.
Um, and so he was really the first Catholic I knew. And so we were to get coffee all the time. I'd ask him questions. like really honest questions of like,
Mhm.
do you all believe that you're saved by works? And I remember one question I said was, why does Mary make me nervous? And and he would give answers, really good answers,
Mhm.
and so God really used, and he was so patient, and he wasn't. I didn't feel like he was trying to convert me, but it definitely became
Mhm.
noticed like I wasn't going to convert him.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but like we tried to make a lot of middle ground.
Mhm.
Okay, speed up. I'll fast forward to last summer. So the summer of 23, my wife all along was not really on board. She was like, for me it was just, it had escalated to the thing. It was like my hobby. My
Mhm.
wife was pregnant with her fourth kid. She'd go to bed at like 8 o'clock, tired, fatigued
Mhm.
from carrying a child, and I would stay up till 11 reading books and listening to lectures and learning. And uh, and that was a really challenging time. And all along my wife was like, I don't really understand why you're doing what you're doing, but whatever. I'm just, don't
Mhm.
talk to me about it. I would try to bring her into it, and she wasn't really interested.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, but we together went to the Sunday school class at our church. So I was an ordained pastor, but I was not a pastor of a local church. I was sent like as a missionary on campus at TU. So I attended a
Mhm.
church. I had a pastor, and they brought in this Episcopal priest who is a professor at Holland Hall. So he doesn't have his own parish,
Mhm.
and he's has his own gripes about the Episcopal Church and this theological liberalism. And so he went to a PCA church, and he taught this class that was it was a church history class, particularly narrowed in on the development of worship. And he
Mhm.
really walked for 12 weeks in a row from the garden until present day. How has worship evolved?
Mhm.
And there was essentially this 1,000-year gap there that he
Mhm.
was really positive about, which was, yeah, Christian worship looked like modern day Catholic Mass. Um,
Mhm.
and and then there became this change due to the revivals, which I knew about, like the Great Awakenings. I don't even know like if Catholics learn about the Great Awakenings, but these Great Awakenings that were happening in the 18th, 19th, 20th century, Billy
Mhm.
Graham, and then later Billy Graham, and then you have this really reform movement, and now we have today's kind of modern expression of worship.
Mhm.
And I went to, I mean, the PCA was a liturgical church. I wasn't like a, Guts or Life Church, which was
Mhm.
very low liturgy. I know that you were part of Life Church,
Yeah.
which has its own positives and does wonderful
Yeah.
things.
Mhm.
But I was a liturgical. It was a liturgical church, but still, it was like extremely different than 1,000 years of worship. And I just remember leaving that those 12 weeks, and that's when my wife really got on board and just like concerned, like, man,
Mhm.
I'm also at this point 2.5 years into getting over all of the emotional hurdles that most Protestants have towards even considering Catholicism.
Mhm.
Um, and then I just became really concerned. And that's when I think that things went really quick, where
Yeah.
we started reading conversion stories. I got my hands on Scott Hahn and
Mhm.
a lot of his stuff. I read Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist and
Mhm.
Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Mary. um, we we started reading about, I got connected to the Coming Home Network, which is a
Mhm.
network for Protestants considering converting into the Catholic Church. In particular, they have a whole network that's just for clergy.
Mhm.
I bet I listened to, I'm not exaggerating, to 150 hours of their podcasts,
Oh, wow.
um, which were, it was essentially like an OCIA class
Mhm.
for Protestant converts,
You said it's called
and
Coming
highly
Home?
recommend it. What?
It's called Coming Home?
Yeah, it's called On the Journey with Matt and Ken.
Oh, okay. Gotcha, gotcha.
But the network is called the Coming Home Network.
Okay, because I'll
Um,
find the link and include that. So
yeah.
if you're watching this live, the link's in the
Hey,
bio because I didn't know anything about that. That would be
oh
cool to
man, they
have.
have 10 to 12 week long courses through each of these like big topics, and it's three Protestant pastors that
Mhm.
became Catholic, and so
Mhm.
I really resonated with it.
Yeah.
And so God really used all that, and then so by this point, let's see, it's probably March. I think in February of this year of 24, I started talking to my pastor. I started talking to my boss and just like, hey, I'm pretty serious. Like, I think we're wrong on some things. Like, I don't think in good conscience I can say I agree with this thing in the Westminster Confession and this
Mm-hmm.
thing, and I don't think maybe I didn't express it with the seriousness that they thought I was at. But a month later, I told my boss, "Hey, I don't think I can come back, like, for real."
Mm-hmm.
And then he pulled out his heresy cards, and he's like, "No, you got
Mm-hmm.
to, like, think about what you're doing." And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I started getting calls from a lot of people in my denomination who were just like trying to stop me from going to hell. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much.
Yeah.
One guy said, "Hey, I understand this phone call as the long extension on Highway I-70 when you get into the Rockies that
Mm-hmm.
tries to stop the semi trucks and gives them brake room before they fall off the mountain. This is what
Mm-hmm.
this conversation is."
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that's the general posture of most pastors in my denomination.
Yeah.
Um, and and so I prayed about it for a month, like really, really legitimately prayed about it. And
Mm-hmm.
there was one time where I went on a day of silent retreat, and I was really sensed the Lord was saying, "You know what's best for you and your family. Like, do it."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and like I think that at this point I was so scared of all the people, all the relational fallout, and I would say
Mm-hmm.
it's been 10 times worse than I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And but do what's best for you and your family. And and so I did. And so I told my boss on April 7th of 24, like, this will be my last semester. There was about a little over a month left, and I was like, I need help figuring out how to tell people, because I raised
Mm-hmm.
support. There was over 100 people that were giving money
Mm-hmm.
to RUF. Um, we had 100 something students in our ministry. I had 1,000, connections within the different churches. I
Mm-hmm.
would go around different churches and preach at every one of the PCA churches, and so, like, I was a weird position where a lot of people knew me,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, so I'm going to need help, figuring out how to talk about this with people.
Yeah.
He's like, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to tell your committee, which is a group of about a dozen men, elders in the Presbyterian Church. You got to tell them this is what's happening. And so I told them, and they met for 3 hours, and they called me back on, and they said, "You're done. Pack up your office. I don't want you to talk to another student,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have any more time there. You're not." This was Wednesday morning. That night we had our second to last worship service. They
Mm-hmm.
said, "You can't be there. We're going to send people in to talk about this for you. You can't meet with your leadership team. You can't talk to people again, and you're
Mm-hmm.
not allowed to talk about what you think of this decision." Um, and so I mean, to use modern day language, I was canceled. Like,
Mm-hmm.
as much as you can get canceled, I was canceled.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was like a dead man walking to these people. And,
Okay.
I'm actually going on a spiritual retreat today for 3 days. And the main thing I'm talking about is how it feels like that was yesterday. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
fresh. There's so much hurt and pain still.
Yeah.
Um, of, we were meant for closure.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole reason I came forward in April instead of in May after the semester was so that I could have like a month of saying goodbye to my students.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a single hour. I didn't have a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anyway, we'll talk about afterwards and what it's like, but what it's been
Yeah.
like for the last 8 months. But
Yeah.
that's the 15-minute, 5-minute version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
tough. And I see a lot of similarities in our stories and a lot like it's way different. Obviously the big one being different is I didn't have a whole I wasn't a pastor. But I was like your wife. I was the one who was like my wife's like, "You want to go to church with me? I'm going to Christ the King." And I was like,
Oh,
"What kind of church
really?
is that?" And it's a Catholic church. I'm like, "Oh gosh, okay." So I was a trumpet player, so I knew all about no, not all about, but like I knew the Catholic Mass. I knew it was super weird. It was like
Yeah.
I love that people call it the religious Olympics and stand, sit, kneel, stand, sit, kneel.
So
Or
you'd been before though? You'd been to
yeah,
Mass?
just to play trumpet at. So they
Okay.
paid.
Yeah.
I was a music major at OSU, so OSU was the main music
Yeah.
program in Oklahoma. It's the best music program in Oklahoma. So they'd call there and say, "Hey, we need a couple trumpets, trombone, or whatever," and they like put together an ensemble. And then our there was a specific, I think it was the trombone director who would literally assign people. So I had
Yeah.
played at Holy Family once, and I'd played at a couple. Well, I think one was Episcopal, but another one was Catholic in Stillwater as well, probably St. Francis. And yeah, so I all I knew was really weird. But growing up, I went to Life Church, like you said, and they do some awesome things. Actually, we've been talking at Christ the King of like how can we be more like Life Church and how they establish small groups, because they kill it. They kill it getting people plugged into Bible studies, and it's so awesome that they do that. Because I always want to make sure people don't think like, oh, I'm going to watch this episode because they're going to be bashing all these Protestant churches, which is definitely not what our intention would be.
And they give so much money away. It's insane.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. But yeah, so I grew up, and so when my wife invited me, I was just like, I'll go, but I'm not going to become Catholic, because all I knew was weird. And the first time I ever even went to Catholic mass was in high school with a girlfriend that I was dating, and I actually sat by her parents at a charity event on Friday, Theology Tower, which is funny. But yeah, I just didn't want to become Catholic. But I know that growing up going to Life Church, I always had this like, I went for like 6 years, and I always had this thought in my head, which I just thought was my own thoughts. And it wasn't until much later that I was like, no, I think God was literally talking to me. Like he was putting this thought in my head of like, there's got to be more to this. That's what I was hearing in my head. There's got to be more to this. And I'm now thinking like, it's like, no, that was God in my ear saying there is more to this. It's not just showing up in like singing worship music with an awesome rock band with all the lights and stuff, and then having someone preach a more so, I
Yes.
mean, it was like a personal development message with a few Bible verses thrown in there. And I
Good
was
way
just
to
like,
put it.
there's got to be more to this. This doesn't, I don't know. Something in me is telling me, and discernment's my number one charism. And so it's just like part of me was like, I don't know, but I never sought it out. So when my wife introduced me to Mass, who, like, long story short, introduced me to Father Elkin, who introduced me to Deacon Harrison Garlick, who was just
Oh,
he was just Harrison Garlick at the time.
yeah.
He invited me to come out and just hang out at the church, because if you ever had any questions, he actually, I think, even admitted, like, yeah, it is weird. It is weird if you don't know much about it, but we'd love to answer those questions for you. And he was the Gerald of my story. And I
Oh man,
moved,
I didn't know that. I love it.
yeah,
I mean,
he's
I've
the
really
best.
enjoyed getting to know him.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I knew him before Gerald, and so when I met Gerald, I would tell my friends, like, you know, Deacon Harrison Garlick, Gerald's right up there with him, like with knowledge and stuff. Like he's
Yeah.
right up there.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, very similar. But yeah, so I met with him, and well, I actually moved to Oklahoma City halfway through OCIA, and he kind of looked to see if there's anything kind of that he would like me to plug into, and he's like, you know, honestly, if you're up for it, what if you drove back once a week and we just went to lunch and we just did one-on-one OCA? So that's how I finished it. And I think the biggest thing is I was open. I was open to it. I knew that there had to be more to it, and all it took was my wife to explain some stuff to me, then Harrison to explain some stuff to me, and I was like, oh man, this makes sense. And so we just go to the
Yeah.
next thing and the next thing, and I just wanted to learn more. And the one thing I know that I thought was like, you don't have to understand everything. There's some core things you need to believe in to become Catholic, but this is a forever learning process. And I just love that it just kept going. It's just like deeper and deeper and deeper. And yeah, it was great. But I feel like the where talking about the big differences with not me and I would being a pastor, there wasn't a big falling out after mine. But the similarities we had, I feel like we were both open. Like we were both open to it. Like the most important thing to us was the
Yeah.
truth. So you wanted to share the truth with Gerald, and then when you started seeing what the truth was, you were like, oh, like yeah, maybe I do need to consider this. And that was my big thing. Is I was always like, if this is the true faith, I will become Catholic. And I have heard
Yeah.
apologist say before we even talk, if this were true, would you become Catholic? And
Yeah.
people sometimes say, no, I wouldn't. And it's like, okay, well, then there's something else you need to work through before we even have this conversation. But a lot of people are like, yeah, absolutely. I'd have to become Catholic. And that's kind of where I was at. And this seems like where maybe you didn't know you're at
Yeah.
first, but you got to that point where you're like, well, if it's true, I have to.
There's an old Reformed uh, pastor and apologist. His name's Steve Brown,
Mm-hmm.
and he was on the Larry King Live
Hmm.
show, I guess, and he asked, and they were talking about the existence of God. I guess Larry King was a pretty outspoken agnostic or atheist, and
Mm-hmm.
he said, "If I answer all of your questions to your liking, will you become a Christian?"
That's
And
awesome.
Larry King was like, "No one's ever asked me that before. I'll have to think about it and get back to you." And he never did. And I
Yeah.
do think that there's something. I've really, really thought about this, about what's the recipe for, I mean, it's the Spirit doing something
Mm-hmm.
unique, but what's the recipe for people being open?
Mm-hmm.
Like why, and I don't know the answer to that. Besides,
Mm-hmm.
there's just so much. If I were the only illustration I'm able to think of is the division of American politics right now on the
Mm-hmm.
extremes, where there's nothing good to say about the other side. Like, it's
Yeah.
impossible. So
Mm-hmm.
you play that out for 500 years,
Mm-hmm.
and like, welcome to the most divided thing in human existence, right? Like,
Yeah.
is you're not able to even consider. And I do think that's what was so positive about both of our experiences was,
Mm-hmm.
oh wait, this man really, well, he's a Catholic and he really loves Jesus. Oh, I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
that was possible.
Yeah.
Um, and
Mm-hmm.
that opened me up slowly, and oh,
Mm-hmm.
he, yeah, anyway. And so then
Yeah.
then for me, the big intellectual shift of,
Mm-hmm.
and they have solid answers. I think there's another thing, like,
Mm-hmm.
if so, for example, if like a Protestant were to come ask me, why do y'all, they would say something accusatory, why do y'all worship Mary?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's okay, well, we don't.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so what do you mean, if I were to then say, well, what do you mean by worship? Well, they would start to answer, and their assumptions would start to unravel,
Mm-hmm.
because they haven't actually looked into it. They don't know why Catholics, adore, or their Catholics' relationship to Mary. They've never studied it for more than 2 seconds, which
Yeah.
is just a
Mm-hmm.
caricature.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start to do that, though, there becomes this, like, it's still unwilling to jump the hurdle. It's still unwilling
Mm-hmm.
to get there.
Yeah.
Like, you'll have a conversation, and you'll really make some solid ground about Mary, for
Mm-hmm.
example. And then 5 minutes later, you're like, so what are your three biggest hangups? Well, number
Mm-hmm.
one is Mary. Number two, it's like, we just talked about Mary.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, yeah,
It's like,
anyway.
no, we overcame that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Are we
yeah.
making any progress?
Yeah. Yeah. We had this conversation with Carlo just recently on that episode, and we were kind of talking about before we started, and he talked about just first of all, like, when you get in these conversations, is the very first thing you do is like, don't start accusing back, but you're like, let's define some terms. Why do Catholics worship Mary? It's like, okay, hold on, let's slow down. Let's define the terms. What do you mean worship? What does worship mean to you? Because yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes it's like not that can answer the question itself. But I think it was either that one or maybe a different one where it was Carlo, but we were talking about what do you do as an apologist when you've answered these questions and they're still, yeah, like you're saying, like, what's your other objections? Well, Mary would still be one of them. It's like, what? I thought we just I thought we talked about that. What do you do there? And he's like, that's where you just keep loving on him and keep praying for him, because at that point there's something deeper, in whether it's pride or it's anger over something in the past or something that's happened to them that's holding them up. And so there's actually a deeper conversion that needs to happen. And sometimes the
Yeah.
only thing that can happen there is the Holy Spirit, but also not to be frustrated or mad. I know that was my
Yeah.
original thoughts, were like, I get so frustrated with people. It's like, no, don't get frustrated. If anything, you should be like sad that they're not seeing it yet, but like, you should be like wanting their soul to be saved,
Yeah.
and that all to be say, not to say like necessarily if you're Protestant, like you're doomed, because there's power. Like, God's not bound by the same
Right. Yeah.
rules that we are, but we want to share the beauty of the Catholic faith, and that's kind of what I saw, and that's kind of why I started this channel as well, is because I wanted to like share my experience. I was like, I am not the most Gerald's smart, Carlo is smart, Deacon Harrison Garlic smart. I am not the smartest person. Actually make
Yeah.
jokes all the time saying, if you're looking for the deepest theological answers, you've come to the right place. Because I can tell you about catholicanswers.com.
Yeah.
It's like
Right.
my podcast could be called Catholic Questions, honestly. Maybe it could be a spinoff of their show, but yeah. So, but I feel like we're both always so open to it, though, open to the
Yeah.
truth, and that's what I feel like. If you get someone that's open to the truth, and then they're actually seeking it out, and they're open minded to reading everything, things
Yeah.
just start to either not make sense if you're reading certain things, or they start to make sense when you're reading Catholic stuff, especially about early church fathers or salvation history. There aren't those gaps, and so yeah.
Because the thing that I've really been focusing on lately, in my writing that I've been publishing to a small group of people, is I think that most people understand, or at least in my little niche reformed world,
Mm-hmm.
their biggest their biggest concern, and it's not even concern, they're convinced that we've fallen from the true gospel of grace and
Mm-hmm.
believe in this idea of salvation by human effort.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony is, like, Augustine was a Catholic who
Mm-hmm.
fought against Pelagius, and Pelagius didn't believe in original sin and didn't and believed that humans were able in their own merit, in their own effort, to become holy. And Augustine was like, "No, that's heresy. That's heresy," and it was outed as heresy. And now somehow in the development of the next 1500 years, Augustine is now seen as Protestant Reformed,
Mm-hmm.
and Catholics are Pelagians. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's not true. If have you
Yeah.
ever read the Catechism? No, I no. The answer is no, they haven't.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like, oh well, the whole thing is it's a different idea, and I do think this is a huge topic of grace. Like, no, everything salvation's by grace.
Mm-hmm.
It's from beginning to end in the Catechism. Like, if you don't take that away, then you just didn't read it closely. The
Yeah.
whole thing's by grace. Um, but I don't know. So I think that there's a niche part of the Protestant world that is so scared to even consider it because they really think it's this heretical,
Mm-hmm.
non-Christian damning. I mean, when I some of my pastoral colleagues said, "You've been deceived by the devil and you're headed for hell." Like,
Mm-hmm.
that was a sentence that was said to me. One person said, "You have fallen from grace, my brother," which is the quote from Galatians. And Paul's rebuke there is to this Judaizer Pharisee crew that's looking to these externals to bring them about righteousness and
Mm-hmm.
acceptance in God's sight, who have fallen from the gospel of grace, which Paul had once told the Galatian church.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying to me that you've fallen from grace. And of course, the irony is that they don't think that's true. You can't.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
you're preserved unto the end. And
Mm-hmm.
so what he must actually believe is that I've just never been a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And he can't say that. So he actually, in that sentence, he went against his own belief system, which is that you
Mm-hmm.
can't fall from grace.
Yeah.
It's a circular. They don't know what to do. They don't know
Yeah.
what to do with Catholic converts.
Yeah. I was gonna say I've seen that one before where it's like I had a conversation recently about someone like being like predestination and stuff, and it somehow fell in that same. We were just kind of going in this circle, and I'm like, you see where this doesn't make sense, right? But
Yeah,
yeah, that kind of so interesting about the back to the works thing is like, yeah, we're saved by grace, and there are places where it's like faith alone, and but it's like we are given things to do though. God doesn't say like, hey, Jesus Christ is going to come down, die on the cross, so you guys are saved, and thank goodness we're doing this so that way you guys don't have to worry about anything, you don't have to do anything. It's like, no, he does that, and then he says Jesus gives us specific things to do and ways to live, and gives people certain missions like receive the Holy Spirit. To the apostles, like those whose sins you forgive are forgiven, and those whose you retain are retained, and he gives
yeah,
us the sacraments and gives us specific ways to live. And yeah, it's so interesting because I actually had this conversation with my wife one time, and I was playing devil's advocate. I was like, "Do we need the sacraments to go to heaven?" Because obviously the answer is no from an overall, but it's not a yes or no because it's like God can do whatever he wants. He's not bound by the sacraments, but us as humans, we are bound by the sacraments. And that sometimes just gets like your brain mushed. And so sometimes I
yeah,
feel like people aren't ready for that like conversation. And so I feel like sometimes there's
yeah,
arguments where it doesn't make sense, but the more you think about it, the more your brain is just like, hold on a second. Like, so we have to do the sacraments. Yes, as Catholics, we have to do sacraments, but do we have to do them to go to heaven? It's like, well, not necessarily, because God can bring whoever into heaven. So do we need to do them? Yes, we need to do them. And it's like, hold on. And just like all of a sudden your brain is just in a blender. But we had this whole conversation, and I was like, this is so interesting. Like, this makes it, but that's where the mystery comes in of it all. And I think he even says, I'm not the biggest Bible scholar, but I think there's somewhere in there that says like, if you feel like you, or a person who says he understands everything or knows it all is a fool.
yeah,
Because there's just parts, things we're not meant to know, or our brains can't handle.
yeah. And I think to two analogies come, I think, in images. One is, um, oftentimes at Mass, you'll see parents giving their kids, when they come around for the collection, you'll see parents giving their kids like dollar bills, and then the
Yeah.
kids put the dollar bills in the collection basket. I just
Mm.
think it's a beautiful illustration of salvation where
Yeah.
God is like, the child can reject it. He can say, "No, I don't want your dollar." Like,
Mm-hmm.
and he also could put it in his pocket and say, "Thanks, Dad. I'm going to go get some candy."
Yeah.
But he's cooperating with his dad or mom, and he gets the dollar and he puts it in the collection. And like, grace is that gift of the dollar, and we are participating with that grace, and
Mm-hmm.
we're putting it in the collection.
Mm-hmm.
The second image is like the the battle between human will and God's will uh, was in competition. Like, Luther saw these things in competition with each other,
Mm-hmm.
or it has to be one or the other, which is why it was so black and white. We're either Pelagians, who were saying it's all human will, and you don't have God could be out of the equation,
Mm-hmm.
or it's totally God's will and human will is out of the equation, and that's the gospel. I mean, that's the
Mm-hmm.
Lutheran gospel.
Yeah.
And like, there, like, a good example would be, who's making this podcast right now? Is it the technology that you use, or is it you?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's both. It's
Yeah.
you and the technology that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
And we are participating with the grace of God. So who's bringing about the salvation? Well, I am, and God is.
Mm-hmm.
And this site could crash, and
Mm-hmm.
your podcast, even though if you're sitting there,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, we cannot any point say, you know what, God, I think I'm done. I think I don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
And but we're not in competition. And it
Mm-hmm.
was such even with like Mary, it's the idea of the app. Gerald will always tell me the idea of like a pie. We were afraid, or saints. Think of something like the saints, that if I were to cut out an eighth of that pie,
Mm-hmm.
or go like Thanksgiving portions, if I were to cut out a third of that pie or a sixth of that pie
Yeah.
and give some of it to Mary, well, goodness, only 5/6 of that is left for Jesus. And
Mm-hmm.
that's bad, because all the pie needs to go to Jesus. Or
Mm-hmm.
if I were to give an eighth of my prayer life to the saints, well, gosh, now I only got 7/8 left for
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just in competition. It's this false dichotomy of it's all or nothing, and so all of it
Mm-hmm.
has to be to Jesus. And it's like, no, I can, like, who said that that was the way that that works?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, if I were to become good friends with a really godly man, and I were
Mm-hmm.
to spend an hour with him, doesn't that
Mm-hmm.
help my relationship with Jesus? I
Yeah.
guess I should just never meet with older godly men and just have my own individual devotional life, because
Yeah.
I just want to give Jesus all my time. Like, no, we don't think about that way.
Yeah.
These things aren't
Mm-hmm.
in competition.
Yeah.
And so salvation works that way. It's just, this Protestant mindset is so competitive.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
it's a good desire. We don't want to steal from the glory of God. Like, that
Mm-hmm.
is, uh, it's driven by a good desire, and
Mm-hmm.
but they've come to wrong conclusions about it, and
Yeah.
therefore we would say they don't have the fullness, right? Like,
Yeah.
they're void of a lot of this that God's given us to strengthen our relationship with Him. And we're like, no,
Mm-hmm.
that Eucharist seems like it could be in competition. It
Mm-hmm.
seems like it's the Reformation, like those icons, that's getting in
Mm-hmm.
the way of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
That Eucharist, it's getting in the way of God.
Yeah.
It's just competitive. Anyway,
Yeah.
all right, I'll
Yeah.
stop my rant.
And it is interesting because they, yeah, it's the conversation you have with someone that eventually is like, well, I mean, I actually really am really curious of what you think. The guy was to kind of mention, we were having this conversation about predestination, and he was mentioning how we're kind of like wind up toys, or we're like Hot Wheels that were set on a track and sent, and that Hot Wheel has no other choice but to follow the track.
Yeah,
And he was making this argument, and I was trying to obviously make the argument for we have free will. But he was like, free will and predestination don't conflict with each other.
yeah,
We're having this conversation, but he was super intrigued and super open to what I was saying. And a lot of the things he was saying, which just like didn't make sense, but I like, so I'm not the one, I'm not the Carlo Broussard of the group, and but I will step up and I will say something. And I just encouraged him. Actually, I sent him 2 Catholic Answers, but encouraged him to look into it. He was, by the end of it, was like, yeah, I do need to look more into the Catholic faith. And I kind of got this sense that maybe it was more so that I can come back here and kind of prove you wrong.
Yeah.
But your story gives me hope that it's like, hey, if that's your goal, like that's awesome. Like, yeah, go research it as long as you're open minded, I guess, about it.
Yeah.
Because he did seem like someone very open to the conversation. But a lot of times, the conversation, I mean, I'm on a YouTube channel, so all the comments are typically not someone actually open to it. We'll say stuff about like the saints and Mary, they're dead. There's no use in praying to them. It's like,
Yeah.
well, God's the God of the living, not of the dead. And so, like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? And Elijah and Moses appeared to Jesus at the transfiguration. So Jesus himself was talking to people that were in heaven.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know where you're
It's
getting
like,
this at.
hey, how about you go to Google and type in, "Are the saints dead?" Catholic answers, and then
Yeah.
just read a 5-minute article and tell me if that's what you think Catholics believe. Or go to YouTube and just say, "Are
Hmm.
the saints dead?" Catholic apologists.
Yeah.
But people aren't going to do that.
No.
Um, the election piece was a really, I mean, obviously, so I was a Calvinist. Presbyterians are all diehard Calvinists.
Hmm.
And and so predestination was such a stumbling block for a lot of evangelical kids coming into our ministry.
Yeah.
And now the problem, and Aquinas talks a lot about election. I mean, election, predestination, these are biblical words and ideas.
Hmm.
And Catholics, in my understanding, are similar. Now, here's the difference. The question of does God save his elect? The question is yes. All right.
Hmm.
The next question Presbyterians never ask, and that is, how do I know that I'm one of them?
Hmm.
And I used to listen to Catholic Answers or Catholic radio, and because it was always really interesting, and it was like as I was driving home, Dr. David Anders was a Protestant PCA pastor convert
Hmm.
who got his study in John Calvin, his doctorate in John Calvin. At the end of it, he became Catholic. Super interesting story. Go read
That
about
is, yeah.
Dr. David Anders.
Yeah.
And I called in. I'd listened to the show for an hour. I never called before. And I said,
Hmm.
what do y'all make of John 6, which is this huge predestination election type passage where Jesus says, I've come to do the will of my Father, and this is God's will that I shall never lose all of whom he has given to me. And so we would use this in my former Calvinistic world as like a bulletproof text
Hmm.
that God predestines Jesus's sheep, and Jesus and the work of his spirit are keeping, preserving unto the end the sheep. That's the will. That's the will of God.
Hmm.
And David Anders, he he gives a solid answer to that, and essentially the short answer is, yeah, but we can walk away. Like that's
Hmm.
God is never going to drop us, but we can just scoot our way out of his hands, right?
Hmm.
But he flips the question and he says, how do you know that you're one of them? You know that Jesus saves the sheep. How do you know that you're a sheep? And
Hmm.
that really unraveled the Puritans, which are these reformed, early American settlers. And
Hmm.
the way that they really answer that question is they go to the evidence, the inward evidence of the Spirit of God in you. And so they look at like, well, are you a loving person? Do you have a devout prayer life?
Hmm.
Do you exemplify fruits of the Spirit? And these things then demonstrate that, like, well, you're a child,
Hmm.
you're a sheep, and you're going to be preserved unto the end. And it's like, well, I'll tell you 20 people I've met that have those fruits that walked away.
Hmm.
So that's not solid. Like
Yeah.
you can't bank on this one time of your life where,
Hmm.
and so that just became definitely working in college ministry where it was just so disheartening. I felt like for the 10 people that would come to faith through our ministry,
Hmm.
the one person that would walk away 2 years later, it unraveled me. It really bothered me.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't theologically know what to do with them because I'm
Hmm.
like, man, they were like really on fire. Like they really loved
Hmm.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm certain of it.
Yeah.
And yet now in my theological system, I have to say they were never a Christian because sheep
Hmm.
don't fall away. Jesus keeps them to the end.
Yeah.
And it just really, I think that really was kind of the stumbling block for me of like,
Hmm.
that can't be true. Like that just
Yeah.
can't be true. How
Yeah.
do I know that I'm one of them?
Hmm.
And like the Catholic answer is like you stay in fellowship with the church. And like that's the historic answer.
Yeah.
You're staying in fellowship. You're participating in the cup. You're
Mm-hmm.
drinking of the cup. You're eating the bread, and
Mm-hmm.
like that's the gift that God's given us as like these assuring graces. Like, how do I
Mm-hmm.
know? Like, go if you want to know, go to confession.
Yeah.
Confess
Mm-hmm.
your sins and hear these words of assurance, which are
Yeah.
Jesus's affirming words over you, like
Yeah.
of pardon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just like, but we don't want to do that
Yeah.
anyway. Yeah,
Yeah, because that does make sense if you think of that argument. But from a Catholic standpoint, it's like, will it ever be lost? It's like, well, no, because he's given us these gifts, and like we can. Like, are you going to be perfect? No. Like, will you actually? I like the analogy. I think it was Dr. Edward Tree, where like you're holding your kid's hand and you're walking along and you're guiding them, and they are safe. Like you've got them, and you're in the mall and you're walking, but then all of a sudden they see the playground, whatever, and you feel that little hand slip out of your hand, and it's like you're gonna like obviously turn and want to go get them, but they kind of wander off, but they come back, and
yeah,
I think that the predestination conversation we had, it was just really interesting because it was very similar to that, where it just wasn't answering that next question. It was just like they weren't ever saved, and that would be just so hard to believe. But yeah, the fact is that like we could fall away and it seemed like we're gone, but we have the ability to come back. Just like we can scoot away, we can also scoot back into it. But
yeah,
without free will, there's no love. And it's like dating. Like I couldn't have told my wife like we're going to be dating, and she went, no, I don't want to. It's like, no, we're going to, we're going to date, and then we're going to get married. And it's like,
yeah,
that's not a loving relationship. But then the predestination, I feel like where it makes sense, and what he was saying was like, well, do you believe that like today you're gonna drive home and then you're gonna decide to stop by Quick Trip? Like you made that choice, but don't you believe like God knew you were gonna decide to stop by Quick Trip, or you're going
yeah,
to have this conversation with your wife, or you're going to like hurt yourself, or you're going to you're gonna evangelize someone, whatever. Like God knows you're gonna do that. So
yeah,
like you're just on a path, and it's just like I understand what you're saying, but you're making the argument from an omniscient God.
yeah.
Yes, it
You should.
the argument almost makes sense. Like does God know exactly what we're going to do, where we're going to end up, everything? Absolutely, because he knows everything. But he's also outside of space, time, and matter. I mean, that's like me watching a movie. Like, is Iron Man going to die at the end of Endgame? It's like, yeah, he's going to. Like, I know he's going to, but it doesn't like change the movie. Yeah.
In the show notes, you should also put this link. I'll send it to you. Recently, it was like probably a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Joe Heschmeyer, funny enough,
Hmm.
Joe Heschmeyer, the author of Pope Peter, Full Circle,
Yeah. Yeah.
which he became a really influential person in the end, like last year of my conversion. I listened to so much Joe Heschmeyer. Um, but he has a episode on predestination, and he mentions and he talks about the two, I would say the two biggest um, evidences, and that is Pharaoh. In Romans 9, Paul says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart,
Hmm.
and he has a really interesting take on this, where it's like, well, three times it's Pharaoh's hardened heart is talked about three times in the Exodus narrative.
Hmm.
One, it says that God hardened his heart, but before that, it says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And then
Hmm.
the second time was that it just said generally that Pharaoh's heart was hardened.
Hmm.
And he makes this case that like God's compassion towards the Israelites, it was such a stumbling block for Pharaoh that his
Hmm.
heart was hardened. Like,
Hmm.
like if you're ever like mad at someone and they're just so nice to you, like it just
Hmm.
kind of can make you
Yeah, it makes
make
you.
you even more upset. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
almost like this compassion of God like was so upsetting to Pharaoh because
Hmm.
he wanted to use these people for his own financial profit.
Hmm.
And so like this story of release and freedom and liberty was like, no, like my heart is hardened to that idea because I'm a
Hmm.
selfish, greedy person.
Hmm.
But Paul summarizes all that in Romans 9 by just saying by one quote. He doesn't quote all three references, by just
Hmm.
saying that God hardened. And his whole point in using that was he always has this kind of back and forth dialogue with himself,
Hmm.
but he's guessing what the question would be, and it's like, wait, the Jews are asking, but why is God bringing the Israelites, or why is God bringing the Gentiles? What's going to happen to us?
Hmm.
And he's like, well, hey, you're the clay, don't talk back to the potter.
Hmm.
And then he uses this analogy of Pharaoh, Okay, so Joe Heschmeyer. The second thing, though, is that he
Hmm.
he talks about how for the predestination Calvinist, Judas almost becomes this, messianic figure, where it's like,
Hmm.
if you want to play the wind up game, where it's
Hmm.
you wind up all of history and then you just let it go. Well, thank God for Judas, who had
Yeah.
no other choice but to betray Jesus.
Yeah.
And he did the very thing that he was destined to do.
Hmm.
It's like, man, I don't know if there's anything that pushes against how I understand scripture depicting God and his
Hmm.
mercy
Yeah.
than from beginning of time
Yeah.
creating a person to betray Jesus and be damned for all eternity because
Hmm.
of it. He had no
Yeah.
say in the matter.
Yeah.
And then it's like, then was his faith genuine ever? Was it ever like and it seems that Jesus understood Judas's faith as legitimate because he
Hmm.
said, "You're speaking to the 12. You're
Hmm.
going to be given like this royal." I had to go find this the two exact quotes, but he says their
Hmm.
names are written in the book of life, and Judas is one of the
Yeah.
12 that he's talking to.
Yeah.
So Jesus is not like he's not lying.
Yeah.
At that time of redemption, at that time of Jesus' ministry, Judas's name was written in the book of life,
Yeah.
and then Judas falls away, and
Hmm.
it's sad and it's tragic,
Yeah.
and then there is that verse that says, now, and he does so to fulfill a prophecy. But then you get into a question of like, how is prophecy played out, and
Yeah.
how do we make sense of how New Testament authors are quoting Old Testament passages, and that's a whole nother conversation that I don't
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and
Don't worry,
that's
I'm not going to go. I'm not
no.
going to nerd out that much. So
It's
there's sufficient answers for it.
Yeah, yeah, and kind of wrap this section up too.
Yes.
Judas is also great. The example I use too. But then also another example is Lucifer, who also had free will and in heaven and chose to
Yeah.
like not do what he was supposed to and was casted out. And yeah, it's like free will was around even before us. And so it's a tough argument. But yeah, but at the end of the day, kind of wrap it all up because I'm kind
Yeah.
of the same way. I could go this, then I could go to the next one. Is like kind of I guess maybe we can leave off with like some before we get into the Saint draft the like encouragement to any Protestants listening or Catholics that know some Protestants that may want to have this conversation with, but what kind of like encouragement would you give someone that is open-minded, is like we came into it like I don't know about this whole Catholic thing, but we came into it open-minded,
Yeah.
or at least became open-minded. What would be your encouragement to them?
Go to mass would be number one.
Hmm.
That was, I think I was blown away by how much scripture was in mass. Like the whole thing is
Yeah.
scripture. I was like,
Yeah.
man, I thought we were the Bible people.
Yeah.
And this whole thing, from all the hymns to the prayers to the readings to the Psalms,
Hmm.
it's littered and like, as you go in, ask the Spirit to open your heart to receive what's being
Hmm.
said and what's being done.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, second would be to really look into some early church fathers and just
Hmm.
realize, yeah, and that's a bigger thing. The the disconnect between 21st century Christianity, Protestant Christianity, and first century Jewish convert Christianity, like
Hmm.
night and day difference.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so go to mass. I would ask a priest or ask a friend, like, who's a church father that I should learn about,
Hmm.
and then I would say that the third thing is like, uh, you learn about the Eucharist, and
Hmm.
learn about, give your own defense for why you think Jesus is not speaking literally in John
Hmm.
6. Like,
Yeah.
how, I don't know. There's so much to the Eucharist that we didn't get to. I know we're running out of time, but
Hmm.
I if that was such a prominent part of Christian worship, for all of history, and it continues to be for Catholics and Orthodox, which take up the majority of the world's Christian population, why do you not think it's a big deal?
Hmm.
And Or if you do think it's a big deal, maybe you come from a liturgical count, maybe you come from a liturgical denomination.
Hmm.
Why does your denomination not think Jesus is really uh, bodily, substantially present there?
Hmm.
Um, and 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 anyway, there's so much there. I would recommend Jesus and the Jewish Roots, the Eucharist. It's such a good
Hmm.
book. Scott Hahn's Last Supper of the Lamb.
Yeah.
There's so much material out there, and it's like a matter of eternal life, right? Like it's
Yeah.
there. Jesus doesn't play around with words.
Hmm.
You must eat of my flesh and drink of my blood to have
Hmm.
eternal life.
Yeah.
And now I don't want to send people out, with a I don't want to scare people into the Catholic Church because like
Yeah.
there's also the sections about ignorance, and
Yeah.
it did come in my own life where Gerald kind of flipped the switch of like, hey,
Hmm.
you know it's true, and now you're not actually living by faith anymore. You're
Yeah.
living by
Hmm.
fear. Your flesh and its desires for comfort and whatnot are taking over. But once you know, like,
Hmm.
you gotta act on that.
Yeah.
And he became a bit more serious in that, and I'm thankful that he did because he's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But
And I think I heard you say one time that and this will be like a quote of Gerald's, didn't he say something like, not acting or not listening is also a form of disobedience or
yeah,
something like that?
he said delayed. I don't know if it was him or something I read. I think it
Hmm.
probably was him. Sounds like him. He said
Hmm.
delayed obedience is disobedience,
Yeah. That's crazy.
and it's
Hmm.
true. I mean, it's true
Yeah.
for all of us, and we know that as dads.
Yeah.
It's like,
Hmm.
no, I don't want you to do that in 10 minutes. I'm asking you to go clean your room right now. We're
Yeah.
leaving.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so delayed obedience is disobedience, and that's
Hmm. Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, cool. Well, yeah. I'll make sure I get all those links from you, and so if you're watching this now, after it's posted, the links are in the bio for all the things we talked about. We'll try to remember as many of them as we can. And we're gonna close like we normally do, which is with the Saint Draft, and this is always our fun game. We close with to one, learn more about the saints. So if you guys are Protestants listening, this is cool just to learn about some saints. It's kind of like learning about your favorite pastor, someone who lived a heroically virtuous life. But we do it in a fun way of like, it's kind of like drafting a starting five basketball team. Once you pick a saint, they're off the table, and you just give a little short reason why. Like you pick my number one pick is this saint because of this, and then we'll just go back and forth. Once they're picked, they're gone. So, and then this is a game where you vote in the comment section who had the better team, knowing that there's no wrong answers. Their teams are saints, so you can't go wrong. So,
I
cool. So,
must say, I'm feeling a bit nervous because
mhm.
I've only been Catholic for a couple months.
I
So
always tried.
my saint background is not a long list. So
Yeah. Well,
something I'm still
I'll
growing
try.
and learning about.
I'll try to go more obscure with mine to leave some of the more popular ones on the list.
My kids love Saints Alive, and
Oh yeah,
so I honestly have learned a lot about saints just from that
yeah,
podcast.
like
So
some. Oh yeah, yeah.
so
There's
good.
a YouTube channel I believe they have too. I don't know if that's the same thing you're talking about, but like there's like these little shorts, or little
Okay.
like 7 to 8 minute videos of like the saints. And yeah, I think I've learned more about saints through those that kids show. That's where I first learned about Saint Philip Neri, through those things. It's like
Yeah.
they're putting it so simple so kids will remember, and I'm like, this is exactly what I need.
Yeah.
So, all right.
So do I go? We just
Mhm.
go one at a time here.
Yeah, yeah, we'll go back and forth. Hmm.
Okay. Um, Saint Francis of Assisi will be my number one pick.
Okay, that's always a good one.
Um, I we used to pray that prayer a lot in RUF of
Hmm.
that I might not much, so much seek to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love, because it's in
Hmm.
giving that you receive, and blah blah.
Nice.
A wonderful prayer, and his vow of poverty, um, and just his commitment to poverty,
Hmm.
when he had so much wealth. It's like, man, if there's one thing that American Christianity is plagued by and deceived by, it's wealth. And I
Yeah,
think we
yeah.
could all learn a lot from St. Francis of Assisi and his relationship
Hmm.
to money.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's kind of just that. I think that's what the enemy's using the most right now. That I mean, there are other things too, but that like everybody's chasing that, and everybody will do whatever they have to get there. It's wild. Okay, I will go with. I always try to like kind of match the kind of the topic of that one. So going off of a saint who was very good with money and has Tulsa roots in her, Saint Catherine Drexel. She came through and raised some money for the church here, and that
Yeah.
money ended up starting the Holy Family School. No.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. So she's got some. She was actually here, like her, I mean, way back in the day, but she actually
I knew
came
she was
through
here. I
here in
worked for
Tulsa.
Catholic Charities, and there's a in the there's a stained glass picture image of
Yeah,
her in
yeah,
the chapel at Catholic Charities.
yeah. And I think a lot of them do it. I know Christ the King also has one in their the
Okay,
Mary Queen of Peace Chapel. But yeah, she had some Tulsa roots and is one of the people responsible for raising the money that started up the Holy Family School, which is super cool.
okay,
Yeah, and she's the patron saint of fundraisers. So I always am thinking about her. No.
yeah.
All right, round two.
Thank you for leaving uh, Saint Pope John Paul. I don't know how to say Saint or Pope first.
Oh yeah. I don't
Uh, the theology of the body. We didn't even talk about that. I don't feel like. Gosh, we got hung up in predestination. Which is funny because like I always refuse to talk about predestination with my
uh,
students because I'm like, guys, this is not talking about that. And here we are, like talking about it. Um,
uh,
but man, theology of the body was such a huge part of my conversion.
I
Which
got it
Father
right
Porter was like, that's funny because
here.
usually it's the biggest deterrent.
Yeah,
But working on a college campus where you with sexuality is just it's just such a prevalent part of our society,
yeah,
prevalent part of my life, prevalent part of these students' lives. Like, good gosh.
yeah.
And the way that particularly Christopher West parses
Hmm.
out and taught me about his theology.
Yeah,
And man, and honestly, most good Protestant books on sex and sexuality right now are all referencing Pope John Paul II,
yeah,
theology of the body, and it's because it's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. This
It's
was one I read this first when I very first became Catholic, and I would say it just went all over my head. And I was like, I mean, there was some stuff that like I understood, but I think it was just like even for me at the time, like I never have been a reader, and so like I just like even it going a little deep, I was like I don't even understand what you're talking about, but it is true. I think this is like a book almost everybody needs to read right now.
yeah,
That's I like have this whole episode planned. I just don't I don't know how I need to. I'm gonna record it at some point. I just it's all about just how the porn industry right now is just kind of killing society, and that OnlyFans has kind of created this now where people can get involved with it from the safety of their home, and it's just like it's horrible. I just want to make sure I'm not like
yeah. We could talk about it, and you'd really get some clicks if we start
yeah,
talking about
yeah,
the ethical implications of vasectomies and
yeah,
natural family planning,
yeah.
and
Be
uh,
some clickbait
you-
for sure.
yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah,
actually the title.
yeah,
Caleb
yeah.
Caleb disagrees with vasectomies. That should be the title.
That would be
Uh,
awesome.
and man, yeah, I won't talk about it other than the sense that you realize, man, we were so locked in step with the Catholic Church. I use we every now and then.
Mm,
The Protestant Church was
mm-hmm,
after the invention of birth control in the 1950s. We
mm-hmm,
were against it step by step
mm-hmm.
until about the 70s,
Yeah,
and then we just stopped talking about it. And
yeah,
now, 50 years later, it's like we essentially in the more like orthodox conservative version of Protestantism,
mm-hmm,
don't have sex outside of marriage, and then birth from that is kind of this purity culture that a lot of
mm-hmm,
people have negative things to say about. And then once you get married, it's going to save your life, and
mm,
you're going to be able to have sex however much you want in whatever way you want. It's all bets off, and
yeah, mm-hmm,
have fun out there. And what
yeah,
happens is you then are actually just playing a role. You're actually idolizing sexuality just like society is. And you're
mm-hmm,
telling single people that don't worry, you're miserable, but you can not be miserable once you
yeah,
can use your wife's body for your own personal
yeah,
sexual gain. It's like
yeah,
that's not what sexuality is.
yeah.
Um, anyway, all right. Pope
What?
John Paul II.
Okay.
Clickbait. You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay. My number two. I always save him for the end, but I'll just go and pick him now because I know no one else is gonna pick him. Most people don't even know anything about him, but it's the patron saint of joy, which is Saint Philip Neri, and that guy is awesome. He had the
Nice.
little way of evangelization just figured out, and he um, was someone that Mother Teresa really liked, and obviously Mother Teresa ended up living a life that most people know about, serving the poor, living with the poor,
Yeah.
but St. Philip Neri was like the Mother Teresa before Mother Teresa. That's what he did. He gave up his family's business, served the church, and then like 13 years into his ministry, he was a layperson. 13 years into his ministry, his spiritual director was like, "You can make a bigger impact as a priest." So then he went back to be a priest, and it's
Yeah.
just super cool. Just someone
Yeah.
who
My
knew.
son's patron saint.
Oh, nice. I think it's
Yeah.
someone that can show. What was it? I think it was. Oh, we just watched
Actually, I'm
recently.
sitting at my son's desk right now,
Oh,
and I just
nice.
realized that he has this cartoon comic, St.
That
Philip
is
Neri,
that's awesome.
the laughing saint.
Yeah, yeah, he
It's like
was.
it's as if we like teed this up. We did
Yeah,
not
I
tee
know,
this
right?
up.
We
I'm
got
just
like
sitting in
books
my
and
son's
stuff.
room.
And I don't think I have any more books, but yeah. So yeah, so Saint Philip Neri will be my next one.
Well, then I'll stick with the theme of TU's parish and go Saint John Henry Newman. His essay. Oh, nice.
Waiting for Christ, Saint John Henry
Yeah.
Newman. That's so funny.
His essay on the development of church doctrine
Hmm.
is there's no way, in my humble opinion, there's no way around it.
Yeah.
Um, you can't. His essential point is you can't claim the fathers. You
Hmm.
can't claim the authority of the councils and not and at the same time
Hmm.
distance yourself from their faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all things develop,
Hmm.
all doctrines develop. The canon itself developed. The greatest development in
Hmm.
Christian faith, the
Yeah.
canon,
Hmm.
um, and we all are thankful for it.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right.
Yeah. So Saint, cool little story. So
And
yeah,
he's
like.
for those who are listening who don't know him, he was an Anglican priest who
Hmm.
converted to the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
And did he remained a priest? Like he got an exception,
Yeah.
right? To
Yeah. I think so.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. And what's cool is, he so you mentioned here like the connections here, for anyone listening that doesn't know, I work at the University of Tulsa at the St. Philip Neri University Parish, which is a college parish, so they're also called Newman Centers. So they're St. John Henry Newman. Upstairs I'm giving a tour and some mom is like, "Oh my gosh, this is cool," and I'm like, "What is she looking at?" And it's like this glass case, and on this little thing right above it, it says, "From the private collection of St. John Henry Newman." And all the books say St. Philip Neri, St. Philip Neri, and they're all these St. Philip Neri. I can't remember exactly what books they are, but they're old. I mean, they're falling apart, and they're like they're lined up, and they're in a glass case, so it's like no one to touch them or whatever. But I'm like, what the heck?
Man,
And
that's cool.
I was like, I'm not gonna lie, I've worked here for 8 months or whatever it was at the time, and I was like, I've never noticed that ever. And yeah, no one ever
Yeah.
pointed out to me. So if anyone ever wants to come see something cool they're in Tulsa.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so what are we on? Number was that was your fourth?
That was
Wait,
my third.
third. Okay, I'm on third. Okay, my third. I loved going with the married saints because I don't think we have enough of them, and we need more. And so, and then I say that they're married, so and there's no rules. So I'm gonna just put both of them in there. St. Louis and Zelly Morton. They're awesome. And there's a
Okay.
book. I think I actually just took it home because I think me and my wife are going to read it for Advent. But there's a book called "The Extraordinary Parents of Saint Therese," and they're the awesome parents of Saint Therese of Lisieux. I just recently, a lot of people have seen the episode. I just posted of myself telling the story. We just had a stillbirth, and we lost our child, and praying with them has been great because they batted 500. They had 4 children, and they lost 4 children. Some of them they lost after birth. Some they lost in miscarriage. And they just had this beautiful story of just like continuing to stay together as a husband and wife and continue to stay close with God.
Mm,
But they're just a great example. And they had all daughters. All 4 of their daughters became religious in religious life.
wow.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
including Saint Therese of Lisieux, who everybody
Yeah.
knows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
round 3, round 4.
I will go. Gosh, I'm going to go Saint Augustine,
Mm.
and I'm going to, from Augustine, go with his 2 stepchildren, which are
Okay.
not Catholic, and that is
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis and Tim Keller. I got to give it a
Nice.
little bit of shout out from
Yeah.
Protestant influence in my life.
Oh yeah.
So C.S. Lewis, oh my gosh, I think do most Catholics like good with him, like for the most
C.S.
part?
Lewis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I have The Screw Tape Letters up there. That's always like a
Yeah,
really highly
guys.
recommended book to read. That's the one I want to read soon. I've had all these books up here, just so everyone knows. I have read maybe two or three of them. They were
Yeah.
given to me. I'm not a big reader, but I need to get more into reading. But yeah, no, I'm pretty sure they're pretty
So
open.
Protestants love Saint Augustine. Uh, they because of his view of Scripture and salvation.
Hmm.
Um, but then they just close their ears when he talks about the church and authority, and they call him a Catholic when he does that.
Hmm.
But he really has influenced a lot of the reform world. And so then Tim Keller, he passed away like a year ago. I would say the most influential thinker in my life, a Presbyterian. We
Hmm.
always joked he was the Pope of the PCA. He
Oh
was a
yeah.
pastor in New York City,
Hmm.
great preacher, highly encourage his sermon. He understands how to evangelize secular society better than anyone else. Period.
Hmm.
Um,
Nice.
he wrote a book called Making Sense of God, and then in 2011, The Reason for God, which I think
Hmm.
work through some of the toughest questions that society asks of Christianity,
Hmm.
and does so in an extremely intellectual way, and also
Yeah.
exposes how secular narratives fall flat. Um,
Nice. You said it's a
anyway,
Presbyterian
so
guy.
Augustine with his Protestant stepchildren, Tim Keller and
Oh
C.S.
yeah,
Lewis.
yeah. I think people even have questions sometimes, like, "Is C.S. Lewis Catholic?" No, I don't think he is. Well, maybe he is. I don't know. Like, I think his
Yeah,
writings, like, if you don't know if he is or not, and you just go off his writings, it's like some of the stuff is like, "Oh, he must be," and then other things like, "Oh, maybe he's not." I don't know, but
yeah.
yeah, we'll
He
assume.
was so anti-Calvinistic too, and it's like
Uh-huh.
we all adored him. I had in seminary there was
Yeah,
a class that was just all the C.S. Lewis works.
yeah,
He was so opposed to predestination
yeah.
in his book Mere Christianity.
Hmm.
So he's very Catholic in a lot of ways,
Yeah,
but
and
Mere
that's
Christianity obviously is.
yeah, and that's another one that's highly recommended. I've heard priests recommend. I've heard like Branson, the Focus
Yeah,
Missionary, recommend it to guys. So I'm sure it's like if he's not Catholic, then it's someone that Catholics still recommend to stuff. And I wonder if like because he could be so like opposed to Calvinists, but the Calvinists still like him, if he had moral authority. I had heard this talk one time on moral authority. These people that are just so good and they just exude Jesus, like they're such a very well or a good-hearted person that they can say something that you disagree with, but you still love the person anyway. And that those are the people that can actually end up
yeah,
making a massive impact. And that leads to my fourth pick, which is Mother Teresa, who they say is one of the biggest ones ever to have moral authority. I mean, she could get up on stage in front of tens of thousands of people and talk about the evils of abortion, and everyone's just like okay, like no one's like Mother Teresa is the worst. Like I feel like if she came
yeah,
back today, she could make a huge impact in the pro-life movement, because I feel like so many
yeah,
people would actually like be willing to listen to her.
yeah. And in our day of social justice, it's like,
Yeah.
man, she
Hmm.
embodied like people would listen to her because she cares about
Yeah.
the oppressed,
Yeah.
poor. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, you just took my fifth, so I'll
Yeah.
swerve and go with my wife's patron saint, and I'm scared that I'm about to be wrong because I know there's two Saint Therese's. The Little Way.
Yeah.
Who's the Little Way? Is that?
Lassou.
Did you already say her?
No, no. Well, I mentioned her parents.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So Saint Therese of Lisieux, I just think has been helpful for us, and just I think all people, parents in particular, maybe. I mean, that's the people that I know. It's like,
Hmm.
man, there's so many things that you do
Hmm.
that either are totally, utterly a waste of time,
Yeah.
or are beautiful in the eyes of God.
Yeah.
And there are these little things that are shaping your heart and your
Hmm.
devotion to Jesus. And
Yeah.
no one's going to notice them. No
Yeah.
one sees
Hmm.
you,
Yeah.
wiping your child's diaper and cleaning your
Hmm.
house for the 100th time.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah,
She'd be going for my last picks. Her talent mixed with this person's talent, St. Francis Xavier, would just be awesome for these days, because her kind of little way of evangelization, but then St. Francis Xavier's willingness to go out and I mean, patron saint of missionaries, but go out and actually put that little way of evangelization into motion. St. Therese was so good at like evangelizing herself. I mean, she was in a convent, so she wasn't necessarily going out and stuff because she had a different role. but St. Francis Xavier was so good at teaching others the little way of evangelization. I feel like that's where I used to be in the multi-level marketing business, and they talked about if you can teach someone, then you can do pretty well. But if you can teach someone how to teach someone, then you're nonstop, like unstoppable. And I was like,
Yeah.
man, this all of that multi-level marketing stuff we learned, I thought was useless, but now it's like, oh no, it's actually that's how we should think of evangelizing. It's like I just need to find, as St. Philip Neri says, give me 10 detached men and watch us change the world. But even like smaller than that, like if you had your five closest people in your life and you evangelize them and got them on the like to be commissioned disciples as well,
Yeah.
kind of exactly what Focus is doing on campuses.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we could change it. You could change a parish in 5 years.
What was the quote? I coughed over. You said, "Give me
Oh,
10 detached men."
yeah, like detachment,
What does that mean?
like detached from this world. So Saint Philip
Oh, yeah,
Neri
yeah,
was really big. I mean, he gave up a wealth. He gave up his business and he went and lived with the poor. He's like, if you can give me 10 people that are willing to do that, to be detached to this world in modern way, like detached from our phones, detached from social
yeah.
media, detached from like the worldly thinking. If we can get 10 guys that are like going to mass more regularly, get 10 guys that are like wanting to start Bible studies and do like something different
Oh,
on a Friday night rather than going to the bars. Yeah, you guys
man.
could change the world real quick because those 10 find 10 themselves, and like if you're able to teach them this community and you send them out, then those 10, the next level is 100 people, and then the next level after that's 1,000 people. I mean, 10x is really fast. And so that's what Branson's kind of focusing on within Christ the King. It's like he has this group that he's been working with for a long time, and he finally sat down with me and asked me like, hey, I want to kick you out of my Bible study. He's I want, and what I said, I want you, like our Bible study is growing. There's more people I want to invite. I think this is time for you to take the OG people, like to take the originals, and you guys break off and go, and you continue to walk with these guys and start preparing them. Because in the next couple of years, we want, or however long it takes until someone's ready, like we want to be able to ask them to then take that step and to lead people through Bible studies, through discipleship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a lot. It's
Man,
not.
I know that we're out of time,
Oh,
but
you're
this is
good.
the power of asking good questions and 3 cups of coffee.
Yeah.
Um, but the whole detached from, so when I heard you say that, I thought of detachment like in a negative sense of like I'm detached from the world and I'm glued into my phone.
Mm,
Like,
yeah.
and so, but I think there's something about the way that I've really noticed and admired Catholics talk about detachment from the world.
Hmm.
That is, it's a difference. Like, how do we? I just let's be a bigger conversation about the step. How do we become detached and the
Hmm.
goodness of being detached? There's this old like David Foster Wallace. He was an atheist, and he has this famous commencement speech where he says there's 2 fish swimming in the water, and one says to the other, "How's the water?" And in response, the fish says back, "What is water?" And it's kind of
Mm,
depicting that you live in this world and you're so shaped by its values
hmm.
and its patterns and its lifestyles that you don't even realize that you're part of it. Like you've been so deeply assimilated into their cultural values.
Hmm.
But that Protestantism in general, if I had a critique that I think most pastors would agree with, Protestant pastors would agree with, it would be that most of their congregation, and this very well might be true
Hmm.
for the fringes or maybe even the masses of the Catholic world too,
Yeah.
but so so there's no culture of Protestantism. There's not like a Presbyterian culture,
Mm,
or an Anglican culture or a charismatic culture. Maybe there's a little bit of that,
hmm.
but there is a Catholic culture, and that can be seen as a negative thing. But like actually, no, that's like a value system
Hmm.
that gives form and framework and meaning for people's lives,
Hmm.
that helps us die to the world and live for Christ,
Hmm.
that I think Protestants need to learn from.
Mm,
It's good to be detached,
yeah.
because if you aren't actively detaching yourself from the world, you're going to idolize sex, you're going to idolize money, you're going to
Yeah.
idolize comfort, you're going to idolize self actualization and all this
Hmm.
other stuff.
Yeah.
That then will Jesus will just become an add-on. It will be like a side helping,
Yeah.
and instead realizing that there's all this stuff is created good. Money's good,
Mm-hmm.
but man, money, the love of money is the greatest evil,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. Like,
Yeah.
so detach yourself from the love of that and give
Yeah.
yourself fully to the love of God.
Yeah.
I don't know. So you got me with like the
Mm-hmm.
change the world with 10 detached men. Like, yes
Yeah.
and amen. Like,
Yeah.
that see the way and the world operates and says that is empty.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of wisdom and goodness in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of comes full circle back to like talking earlier about the saints and for some people mentioning like not liking the saints and it's weird, it's taking away from Jesus, they're dead, why are you talking to them? It's like there's so much wisdom and beauty in them. It's like if we're going to
Yeah.
read a book on the first one comes to mind is like how to win and influence people. It's like a big sales book, like a personal development salesperson's book. It's like that's all we're doing, but just for the faith life we're reading the lives of people and the wisdom of people that have done it already very, very well. Like they have
Yeah.
reached a level of their spirituality that I want to reach, and so I want to read what they have to say. Like I want to read what they have to, the advice they want to give. And yeah.
And I just had a podcast episode on when I riffed on saints, and it's like, and when you get rid of that, and you because we're created by God and we're created like with these things in mind,
Mm-hmm.
um, when you don't have those people to look up to,
Mm-hmm.
you look for like who do you look for? Athletes and musicians and
Yeah.
actors and
Mm-hmm.
people who are really good with money and have skills. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have saints. Protestants worship, they don't worship, sorry, I shouldn't have said that word. Protestants,
We'll
they
beep it
look
out.
to saints.
Yeah.
They look to saints. I would actually say they do worship saints.
Mm-hmm.
But these saints are actually people with skills, not people of
Mm-hmm.
character.
Yeah.
Um, because their hearts are made to look to someone, just as Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." Like, we're created to follow good moral examples.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't have any of that in the Protestant world, you will instead devote your life to becoming a really good whatever and gaining
Mm-hmm.
this really good skill, just like so and so your hero.
Yeah.
Or you'll idolize your pastor,
Yeah.
and your pastor will become,
Mm-hmm.
the saint. Where it's like, I want to be a
Yeah.
good preacher like that person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, man, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I love when I learned that in Catholic seminary, you spend your first year just learning how to pray.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I had one class
Mm-hmm.
on spiritual life. One. I
Yeah.
took 104 hours of Masters of Divinity
Mm-hmm.
classes,
Yeah. Yeah.
like 50 classes, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like one class on
Yeah.
spiritual life, your interior
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
It shows in my world where it's a bunch of, I know the Bible inside and out. I could talk theology all day.
Mm-hmm.
I dig the intellectual world, but goodness, like,
Yeah.
we idolize people who can speak and who can think, and the Catholics idolize people who can pray and commune,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I think to close it out, I think one
I'll
of
be done. I'm not going to go on anymore. I'm done.
yeah, I'm muting your mic. No, I'm just kidding. One of the most beautiful things I experienced one time, and the only because I feel like I can be attached sometimes, but the one time I felt this detachment was being invited on a Thursday night to a talk and adoration at Christ the King from Tara Lauderdale, who's actually part of this show. So shameless plug. She has her first episode comes out this Friday. But she invited us to she was doing a small talk and then there was me adoration for like an hour or whatever. It was on Thursday night, and in my as a man and as a sports guy, like I was like, that's Thursday night football, dang. And I was like, but being in there, like something, I don't know, something about choosing to go still and sacrificing that time
Right.
and like detaching myself from that to then go sit in the church and pray. Like that was like, I like still remember to this day, like how like I felt leaving. And I remember telling my wife, it's like that hour went by really quick.
Yeah.
And it felt really good. It felt cool to like look around and see like there were like maybe 13 other people, 20 other people at the most. And so we were inside the big church of Christ the King. So we looked like a tiny group because that thing seats a few hundred. But just looking around and seeing like, this is so cool that like all of these young adults would choose to come and pray and come talk about the
Yeah.
faith on a Thursday night, whether it's sports or whether it's just Thirsty Thursdays or whatever. Like these young adults, like 21 to 28-year-olds, like chose to come and pray and be in front of the sacrament. So it's super cool.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, we're gonna wrap it up, guys. Don't
I've
forget to
got
like and
three things to
subscribe.
say to that, and I'm not going to say
Yeah,
any of them. That's
yeah.
self-control, Josh. You're welcome.
Well, yeah, we'll have you back on for sure, definitely.
Okay.
I need to get Gerald back on. I actually have a whole series coming up for Lent that I need to talk to you guys about anyway. So you stick on afterwards, but everyone, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, we have the first ever Tell Me About It, Tara. Tara is unlike me. She is a very has the theological mind and great knowledge and wisdom, and she's gonna be sharing something with you guys on some short episodes that will come out every other Friday starting this week. And so join her. She talks about preparing for Advent and what Advent is, and she'll be tackling some more tougher questions and stuff like on manifestation and stuff like that, which is gonna be fun. But you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will see you guys next week.